Thank you so much, Nicole. And Aimee, I'm excited to be chatting with you today as a leader in the space of kind of working with so many of our clients and so many of our community members. I'd love to kind of jump in and ask some questions. And then, obviously, audience, jump in the chat. We would love to hear your questions, where you're dialing in from, anything specific to returnships or how to get hired during a recession. So I'd love to hear, there's a few questions that kind of came up, but kind of starting in general, why are return to work programs critical to inclusive and diverse workforces?
Definitely. Thank you so much, Aimee. I think there's so many layers to diversity, right? And one way that we're really trying to tackle that is the gender component. And I think when you break that down even further, there's so much diversity in the experiences of women or caretakers generally. And so I think by not really tapping into that talent pool, employers are really missing out on people that have fundamentally garnered a lot of skills that are very useful at work. I mean, who's better at multitasking than caregivers and moms, especially in the time of COVID? And so just like some women may take time to travel or some women may have, really focused on their career, it's equally important to have women that have devoted time to being at home, caring for their children, perhaps elderly family members, and giving them opportunities as well, because they have so much to offer. And I think sometimes that diversity of thought is not necessarily the first thing that comes to mind, diversity of your background or perspective when it comes to the experiences of women. But that is why return to work programs are so important, because they're really a way for those types of candidates to get their foot in the door that obviously may have a more difficult time in a traditional recruiting world.
Yes, we commonly hear women during these events and in all PowerToFly events, they talk about what to do with their career gap on their resume and how to make it a positive thing versus like just something that the recruiter will focus on. What advice or suggestions would you give to somebody that is looking for a job, but maybe not in a returnship program, but just wanting to get back into the workforce after taking some time off to care for their children, a loved one, or because of COVID?
Yeah, well, I think for those who are able to really do their research, it is important to think about what companies feels important to themselves, right? So if you are someone who is trying to get back in the workforce and get a foot in the door, I would actually really urge people to consider doing the research, right? And looking at companies who already have this inclusive mindset of, okay, I understand that there's so much value in these candidates, but perhaps they may have stepped away and technology may have modernized in the tech space. So companies that already have these programs in place, quite honestly, are going to be the best way to get your foot back in the door. And so I really urge people to think about that and to do the research, to look at places that already have these offerings. Outside of that, I think it's very important, if you do want to look at traditional roles, to really use that cover letter as a space to tell your story, right? Your personal story, perhaps what you did before you stepped away from the workforce, why you felt it was important to do that, and what sort of skills you have been still cultivating in that time away. And so I really think a cover letter is a great place to sort of set the stage for that story so they understand where you're coming from. But again, I can't say how important it is, I think, to research the companies that you're applying to and to figure out if culturally they already understand your value by having these programs in place. And PowerToFly has many clients that have these types of programs. And so certainly maybe we can follow up with a list of those. And that's a great starting point for anyone on the line who has stepped away from the workforce. And of course, we're talking about mothers quite often, or caregivers, but a lot of these are open to people that may have just decided to step away to travel or to try something else temporarily. And so no matter your background, these are really good places for you to get your foot in the door.
Yes, working with a lot of our clients, I've noticed that everyone's program is a little bit different. And so doing that research ahead of time to know, some require 6 months off, some require more than 2 years, some require no work at all during that time. So research is huge. There's a question that came up, and I think that this kind of aligns with doing research, because It's a little bit different regards to a returnship, but how would you suggest someone balance a job search while caring for their children, while maybe doing whether it's full-time work or even part-time or even kind of maybe doing some volunteer work to stay up on their skills? Like, what would be some tips and tricks around that balance?
Definitely. And I may even push this back on you at some point, Aimee, because you are obviously a very valued full-time member of our sales team while being a mother. But I do think it's very important to really focus on your time management. So if you don't have a full-time job, I would really implore you to approach your job search like it is a full-time job, right? To really be putting in those hours and putting in that time to get your resume and your cover letter sorted, to make sure that you're customizing them to whatever role you're applying to. I also think, regardless of whether you have a full-time job or not, networking events and hiring events, kind of getting your foot in the door through making those connections initially, is also going to play a very key role in sort of making yourself stand up from the candidate black hole of the ATS, right? And so I think if you can carve out time to attend those types of events and to just be making those connections, it's always going to serve you well. And then in terms of, how do you balance that if you are a full-time mother? I think it's really important to, speak transparently to your partner, perhaps ask if there's family or, aftercare programs where you can just get that hour or those 2 hours to really put in the time and compartmentalize, because, the job search it takes time out of your schedule, and you have to be able to step away and really devote that time to building your personal story, explaining your skills in the best way you can, and just making sure that you allot the proper amount of attention to that. And, Aimee C, I know that you aren't necessarily looking for a job, but like I said, if you have a full-time job or searching as your full-time job, I would definitely let the audience hear any advice that you have here as well.
Yes. One of the things when I think about this question, you nailed it with regards to time management. And as a working parent, I have to make sure that I sometimes feel like I'm having to manage every part, every moment of my day so that I'm able to kind of get everything done. And then the other thing, and my kids are a little bit older. I said, Nicole said tween. I just realized that I have a 10 and a 13-year-old. So I'm very upfront with them about things. So, and I think that this would be the same if you have children that are older and understand, like, mommy gets to go to these exciting events. I'm getting to go to do it. Talk to them and let them know what's going on and let them feel a part of it. And I think that that's huge. My daughter cheers me on. So whether that's, being able to participate in events like this, she knows what's going on. We have this little inside joke that she'll say, like, I hope you do really terrible. What she really means is, like, break a leg, like she wants me to do good. And I think that that's the number one thing. Kids are resilient and will be fine, but they want to know and they're curious. And for my friends that I know and people that I know that have gone back to the workforce, they bring their family in on the decision. And that helps make a huge impact to say, like, mom is going to be doing this and this is why. And I think that makes that really helps. And that then your kids can all of a sudden, oh, I'll bring the trash in or I'll get dinner ready.
Definitely.
We had a question come in, and this is interesting. Someone said, can you speak to why most returnship programs seek applicants with a VP level or above? So I don't know if you've seen this as well. I've talked to a few clients with this. I'd love to hear your kind of take on this, and then I can share what I hear from others.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have also seen that sometimes be a requirement of the returnship programs. I think if that's not where you are seniority wise, another avenue to really research would be fellowships, where perhaps you don't have that level of experience, but you have completed a boot camp or you've done personal projects, or you've been mentored in this space. And now a company understands that upskilling goes so far in really furthering diversity and inclusion that they're putting into place those types of programs. I will say that I don't think that every returnship program or return to work program that our clients offer requires a VP level. But if that is the case, I would really encourage people to check out fellowships or apprenticeships, as they're sometimes called, versus a return to work program. I think both of them really go a long way in changing the makeup of teams and ensuring that you have all types of people at the table.
Yeah, and when I've asked some people about this, I think it's because that they want to make a really big impact for the organizations, and they recognize that sometimes that bottom rung is broken for women to get into management. I've seen a lot of our financial service clients have returnships, and one thing to notice or kind of note with financial service clients is that a VP level at a bank might be different than, let's say, a VP level at a defense contractor. So look at the responsibilities, look at what they're asking before you assume VP and you think that they're like, wanting 20 years of industry experience managing a team of, 100 plus. And then it goes back to the research, look for places and opportunities that are more flexible, because I think most of the time people are not going to want to they're not going to want to take 10 years off of work and then jump into, working 60, 70 hours a week. And you want to know that ahead of time if that's the expectation, because that might not be the place for you.
Definitely.
Awesome. So someone asked a really good question around being in the middle of their job search and she turned down an opportunity and regretting it. When do you kind of recommend people, or do you ever recommend someone kind of lower their expectations?
So I don't think it's always necessarily lowering your expectations if, you perhaps do take a job that you didn't foresee yourself doing. I feel like when I was younger, I foresaw myself being a vet, and my life has turned out totally differently. So I definitely kind of encourage people to think about their job search in that way as well. You never sort of know where an opportunity might lead, what new skills you might pick up. And I think, for this particular individual, perhaps they're having second thoughts now, but I also think that everything happens for a reason. I'm sure in that interview process, you learned a lot. Some skills on how to further improve in the interview process, maybe getting a little more confidence since you actually got the offer. And now you can use those skills to go ahead and sort of re-navigate the search going forward. So I definitely would just encourage anyone to sort of maybe not think of it as lowering the standards, as I said, but just taking a different path and seeing where that leads. Because I think there's beauty in that as well, even if it's just not exactly what you thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. I guess it's a change of word. Instead of settle, it might be, take a different path. Someone asked a question that was specific to something that you brought up earlier, and I'd love to kind of dive into this. For fellowships and apprenticeships, wouldn't you be competing with younger people straight out of college for those roles?
So I think that depends on company to company, right? There's a big movement. I think industry wide, people are realizing you can't just expect to hire people in these VP levels or above and really to make real change. And so oftentimes you may have college grads or camp candidates coming in at those levels. But oftentimes they're open to candidates regardless of their background. Perhaps they did not even go to college, but they have spent time in a different workspace, right? And really, I would say that sort of what connects all of those programs is this ability to upskill on the job. And certainly we have many clients that it's not necessarily just out of college or out of school, but basically people that want to change careers. And again, maybe when we follow up with our clients who have returnship programs, we can also follow up with those who have more of the apprenticeship or the fellowship positions as well. And we can denote who exactly is only looking at grads and who is looking at a wider skew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, a plug for the PowerToFly job board and career site. You can go in and search kind of a few different terms, obviously return to work, returnships. I've heard it called encore, reignite, all different terms. So those are terms to kind of look up and search. Obviously, we have the job fair on Friday, which is a great opportunity to kind of hear from people in a very casual setting what they're looking for. There's a question around, do returnships consider women who may have been underemployed rather than unemployed for a period of time?
Underemployed. Can I ask the attendee to sort of clarify what that means? Does it perhaps mean just in a different field or at a lower level than they originally perceived?
We will give that person a moment to clarify their question. And going back, let's see, there was a question, and this is important. What do you suggest for references? A lot of places want former employers direct contact information, but we don't always know our former employer. Maybe they've changed jobs, they've changed phone numbers. What would be some suggestions for references?
Certainly. So I've actually, when I was first starting out and looking for a job, I've used advisors in the college that I went to who really helped me with sort of thesis projects and things like that. I've even used maybe temporary summer jobs that I had throughout my college career before I really entered the professional environment. I've used those as references. I really think that you can get creative. It's certainly shouldn't be a deterrent. And again, this is where I really think like understanding a company culture is so important, because if someone is looking at you for an entry level job, but then really needs to see like very explicit professional level references, then I think that shows that they're not fully on board with inclusivity, right? You can't expect everyone to have 4 of those at the ready if they're earlier in their career. But I think definitely no matter what employment opportunities you have had thus far, just because they may not be in the same industry, the same field, so much of what makes someone successful at a job is their soft skills, which, you can really tell about someone no matter what sector they're in. Are they a problem solver? Can you depend on them? Will they mentor others or lead new people, right? It doesn't matter what sort of space you're in. Those are skills that are transferable. And I think if you have references that can talk about that, whether in the academic space, in a different type of role, whatever it may be, a real inclusive client will understand that those skills are the most important, and that person is speaking for those as well.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I will suggest, and I recommend to this when we were doing a lot of on-site events and people would ask me about how to kind of upscale and taking time off, if you have the opportunity to volunteer, um, do that. A lot of nonprofits, you will get to, in a volunteer setting, get to wear so many different hats, whether that run a marketing campaign, whether planning an event. There are opportunities to sit on boards. I know my county is always looking for someone to sit on the board. And I didn't realize I could literally throw my hat in the ring and I could sit on the library board. My husband has told me I'm not allowed to do anything else. So I will not be just sitting on a board. But if you have the opportunity and time and passion about something, take that passion and be able to use that, because every nonprofit I've ever volunteered for, they will, you will get an amazing experience. It's not a former employer, but going back to your term, if a company is not willing to take that as a reference, do you want to work there?
Definitely. And that is so important. Thank you so much, Aimee, for adding that, because I will say that there's certain clients who won't even look at resumes without volunteer experience, because it does say so much about you if you take your time and you give it to a cause that you really want to impact the world for good. And so outside of potentially using these volunteer coordinators as a reference, I think it actually will also get your resume to the top of the queue, because it's so important to really show that, not only are you invested in the company you're applying to, but you're invested to also furthering causes for social justice in the world. And so many of specifically our PowerToFly clients feel like that's important as well.
Mm-hmm. And thank you, audience member, for adding some clarification on underemployed. The clarification that came in, it may be at a lower level than qualified in order to take time to raise a family. So I guess maybe an example is if you were previously a sales manager or a manager on your team, but then went back into like a part-time individual contributor level role. Do you see opportunities for people in that capacity of doing a returnship?
Yes, definitely. I think that as long as you are, like I said, either attending these events and making these connections or doing some LinkedIn outreach, as well as really working on that story for your cover letter, your objective summary, and the resume, that should not be a deterrent to the right type of company, especially if you're able to really say, like, I took a sabbatical of sorts. I felt it was important to care for my child. And then I came back in a capacity where at that age, that's what I felt I needed to do, right? I needed to be part-time, or I needed to take on less responsibility. And now I'm at a point where I'm ready to get back in there. And I know that sometimes it's very hard to concisely tell that story, but that's definitely what I suggest for someone who, just has that non-traditional background, or perhaps had to step away at some point and come back, not at a lower level necessarily, but just at a job that required different responsibilities so that you could spend that time elsewhere. Going back to time management, right? I think when people are really spending a lot of time caregiving, it's not that they can't work, it's just that they need to make that layout or that alignment of their time look a little different. And again, that should not be seen as a negative, because while you're being a caregiver, you're cultivating such other important skills to bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, I like to joke. We should all hire like the president of the PTOs, because those people know how to get things done.
Get stuff done. Yes.
All right, there's a question from the audience. Do you have any resources you can recommend for returnships, career pivots outside of tech? They have been unemployed for almost a year, trying to leave technology, has been a QA analyst since 1999, and they would like to get into copy editing.
Sure. So I am happy to, if possible, meet with you one-on-one to discuss more copy editing opportunities specifically. But outside of tech, I know that, one of our clients has this wonderful program for customer success beginners to really get in there, learn, and move up. Some of our other clients who offer return to work programs really across a skew of roles would be Amazon, Facebook, Boeing, Dell, Deloitte, Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, Raytheon, PayPal, and there's more that are working with PowerToFly specifically. And so I do believe that not all of those are specifically tech focused. And so I think if you're trying to find something in the copywriting world, I would maybe suggest looking more at media companies or places like marketing tech, right? Where that's really what they specialize in. And perhaps they need just freelancers. That's another good way to get your feet in the door for copywriting specifically, is maybe getting something where you're paid hourly and then really killing that and showing them how great you are, and then being able to come on full time. So like I said, really happy to discuss specific kind of copywriting opportunities. But I think in the meantime, looking in those industries that have more of that involved will also be useful. And then, of course, looking at the PowerToFly page to really explore the different areas outside of tech with those companies that I mentioned, because there's quite a few and they're all a little different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of great resources on PowerToFly, and I think just kind of Googling some different things. But the number one thing, it's the time investment with networking. The more you network, PowerToFly does daily events, but then there's also now Lunch Club. I've met some amazing people through Lunch Club, and you could start to get ideas to develop so that you feel comfortable getting there, and other suggestions from people. Awesome. The one last question that I wanted to ask you, because you brought up kind of cover letters, and I guess this is an age-old question.
Mm-hmm.
How important are cover letters? Do people really need them? And tips, suggestions for getting started writing one?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I actually really do feel like cover letters are still important. Now, that's not to say that it's not frustrating when you write multiple cover letters that are customized and you submit them and you don't hear a response, that's not frustrating. But I will say that for myself, when I'm looking to hire people, uh, those that go out of their way to really explain explicitly why they're so interested in the job, how their skills translate if they don't have a traditional background, it really says a lot. And I think a lot of times, if you can also perhaps send that message on LinkedIn or make a connection alongside that application, that will go a long way. But the resume doesn't really give you the space to explain your story, right? And that's where I think if you are perhaps trying to switch careers or you're trying to come back in the workforce, you want to take the time to put in that cover letter so that you can explain that story. And it needs to be concise and it needs to be well written, but there's really, really great ways to do that. And I think at some points we have chat and learns on writing. And so those are things that you can attend. But that's where I think the cover letter comes into play, is when a recruiter can't really see the connection in your resume alone, the cover letter is the space to explain that. And that's why I do feel it's specifically important when it comes to sort of returning to work or switching careers, to be able to tell that story there.
Great. Well, this was so much fun to be able to chat with you. I feel like Aimee and I, we're always slacking back and forth, and we used to be able to see each other in New York. But it's great to at least see you on a Zoom, and I know the audience had some great questions. So thank you, Aimee.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience. It was so great hearing your questions. And I hope we can connect again soon. Thanks.